The room went quiet the moment she walked in. 45. Rangers, men who had buried friends in 4 different countries, men who had earned their scars the hard way, and every single one of them looked at Captain Elena Ward and made the same calculation in under 3 seconds. Too young, too small, wrong. One of them actually laughed. Not quietly, not under his breath. He let it out, like it was the funniest thing he'd seen all year. Elena didn't flinch. She set her folder on the table, clicked the projector, and let the satellite image of a burned industrial complex fill the wall behind her. 12 Americans, she said. 72 hours before they're executed. And right now, I'm the only plan you've got. The laughter stopped. If you're new here, subscribe now and follow this story to the end. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this has traveled. Like if you stayed past the first minute, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about leadership. The briefing room at Fort Raven smelled like burnt coffee and old ambition. It was 530 when Captain Elena Ward pushed through the heavy steel door, her boots hitting the concrete floor with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't announce itself, it just exists. The fluorescent light overhead, the way it always did and buzzed and flickered, the way it always did in Building 7, which was the kind of building the Army kept meaning to renovate and never did. Metal folding chairs scraped against the floor as 45 men shifted to get a better look at whoever had just walked in. They saw her. The reaction wasn't loud. It rarely was with Rangers. These weren't men who broadcasted their feelings. They had learned, long ago, to compress everything into tight, controlled silences. But a silence can say 1,000 things, and this one said, "Who the hell is this?" Elena was 29 years old. She stood 5'6" in her boots, with a lean build that carried no wasted weight. Dark hair pulled tight at the back of her skull, and eyes that were the kind of calm green that people either found reassuring or unsettling depending on what side of a decision they were on. Her uniform was clean, her rank insignia 2 silver bars. Captain caught the light for exactly 1 second before she moved to the front of the room. She didn't introduce herself. She set a black folder on the table and clicked a small remote. The projector hummed. A satellite image expanded across the wall, a sprawling industrial complex shot from above, the kind of gray and brown geometry that could have been anywhere in the world if you didn't know what to look for. Grid lines overlaid the image, red markers at 4 positions, 2 white shapes that were vehicles, and in the lower right corner, a timestamp. Mosul outskirts, Elena said. This image is 14 hours old. Clicked again. A second image appeared, zoomed in. The vehicles were gone. The red markers had shifted. This one is 6 hours old. She turned to face the room for the first time. They're moving them every 8 to 10 hours, rotating between 3 confirmed sites and at least 1 unconfirmed. 12 American civilian contractors, 5 women, 7 men captured 11 days ago during a logistics convoy ambush outside the city. Their employer negotiated for 5 days. Those negotiations collapsed 36 hours ago. She paused. We have a 72-hour window before the deadline, and that number is soft. Could be shorter. The room was quiet in a different way now. Clicked a third image. This one showed personnel movements, small infrared shapes caught in low-light surveillance footage. What we know about the group holding them, 40-plus fighters, organized command structure, 2 technical vehicles with mounted weapons, and someone inside who understands counter-surveillance. They swept 2 embedded assets in the first 48 hours. Whatever we do next, we're doing blind on the ground. From the second row, a voice. Who cleared you for this mission? Elena found the face. Senior Sergeant Major Victor Hale, 53 years old. 3 combat deployments, 2 silver stars, and the kind of face that had stopped apologizing for itself sometime around 1999. He was big, not just tall, but broad through the shoulders in a way that made the folding chair underneath him look like an afterthought. His arms were crossed. His expression was the specific variety of unimpressed that takes decades to perfect. "General Marsh and the Joint Special Operations Command," Elena said. "You can verify that after this briefing. I'll verify it before I take orders from a captain I've never heard of." "That's your right." She didn't blink. "But the briefing keeps going either way." Hale held eye contact for a long moment. Then, slowly, he uncrossed his arms and leaned back. It wasn't agreement. It was patience. There was a difference, and he wanted her to feel it. Kept going. The plan she laid out took 40 minutes. Phase 1, insertion via 2 MH-60 Blackhawks, dropping 6 kilometers south of the primary target site, with a third bird holding at distance as emergency extraction. Phase 2, a 4-team advance toward the complex, with 2 teams establishing overwatch on the eastern and northern approaches while the primary element moved through the drainage infrastructure beneath the western wall. Phase 3, simultaneous breach at 3 internal positions, prioritizing the structure in the northwest quadrant where thermal imaging had shown the highest concentration of non-combatant body signatures over the past 3 observation windows. She walked them through contingencies. 3 of them. Each one specific, each one with assigned responsibilities, each one accounting for a different collapse scenario. Aerial compromise, ground contact before breach, hostage movement during approach. When she finished, the room was different than when she'd started. Not converted, not convinced, but paying a different kind of attention. "You've done CQB before?" The question came from the back row. A staff sergeant named Petrov, dark-eyed and compact, the kind of quiet soldier, who asked the questions. Everyone else was thinking. "Real CQB, not a training house." 3 times, Elena said. "Iraq in 19 and twice in Syria." "Doing what?" "ISR coordination on the first one. Direct action on the next 2. Petrov nodded slowly, filed that away. "Hale, again the drainage approach. That corridor is 50 meters long and narrows to about 4 feet at the midpoint. They're listening for movement underground, and if they swept 2 assets, they're smart enough to be. That's a kill tunnel." "Correct," Elena said. "So you're going to send people through a kill tunnel. I'm going to send me through a kill tunnel. The team follows, once I've confirmed the passage is cold." A beat of silence. "That's not protocol," said someone from the left side of the room. "No," she agreed. "It's judgment." Hale looked at her for a long moment. Not warmly, not dismissively either, like a man recalibrating something he thought he'd already figured out. The briefing ended at 615. Men filtered out in groups, their voices low, and clipped the specific register of soldiers who have received real information and are processing it rather than reacting to it. Elena gathered her materials and clicked off the projector. As she was pulling the satellite printouts from the corkboard, she heard boots behind her. "She didn't turn around, Captain." Hale's voice was different without the audience. Lower, more direct. She turned. He was standing about 8 feet away, which was as close as Victor Hale ever stood, to anyone he hadn't decided to trust yet. His hands were at his sides. His expression had shifted, not to warmth, but to something more honest. A man showing his actual position instead of his performance of it. "I've served under 16 officers in 29 years, he said. 11 of them were good, 3 were great, and 2 of them got people killed because they believed being smart was the same as being right." Elena held his gaze. "Which category are you putting me in?" "I don't know yet." He let that sit for a moment. "That's the point." He left without waiting for a response. Elena looked at the empty room, the overturned coffee cups, the folding chairs shoved back at angles, the project screens still slightly crooked from when someone had bumped it, and she let out one slow breath through her nose. Then she picked up her folder and went to work. Fort Raven in early November was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The Georgia wind came off the pine flats, sharp and flat, and the training areas east of the main complex were exposed enough that by 500, when the first formations assembled in the gray pre-dawn, Every man's breath made small clouds that disappeared into the darkness above them. Elena ran the first PT session herself. She didn't announce it beforehand. She simply appeared at the front of the formation when Sergeant First Class Darnell Oakes was about to take them out, and without a word, she moved to the lead position and started moving. They did 8 miles, not the regulation route she took them, off the marked trail and into the tree line, navigating by terrain features, pushing them through 2 creek crossings where the water came up to mid-thigh and staying cold against the boots for the next 3 miles. She set a pace that wasn't punishing but was relentless, and at no point did she slow for herself. A ranger named Colette, lean and wiry with a runner's build, pulled up beside her around mile 5 with the specific energy of a man who has decided to make a point. "You always run like you're late?" he said. "I'm always late," she said without looking at him. He matched her stride for 30 seconds, then 40. Then he began to fall back, not because he couldn't hold the pace, but because she had increased it by a fraction so small that he didn't notice until he was already behind her. She didn't comment on it. When they returned to the compound, muddy and cold, she walked them directly into first tactical exercise of the day, without a break. Map reading under stress. She gave each 4-man team a grid reference and 20 minutes to plan a route to it using only paper maps and compass. No GPS, no digital overlays, no consultation between teams. 3 teams produced workable routes. 1 produced a route that sent them through the middle of a marked minefield on the training area's restricted zone map. She called out that team's leader by name, a corporal named Brannick, without raising her voice. "Walk me through your planning process." Brannick was 22, red-haired, the kind of young soldier who had grown up being told he was sharp and believed it a little too readily. He explained his route with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet realized the confidence was misplaced. Elena let him finish. "Then you crossed grid line Whiskey 7. Pause. That's a secondary creek drainage. That's a restricted zone boundary. There's a training minefield between Whiskey 7 and Bravo 3 that's been on every area map for 11 years. She picked up the map from the table between them and turned it so the legend was visible. "What's this symbol?" Brannick looked at it. His face changed. "That's a mine warning indicator," he said quietly. "Correct." She set the map down. "This route gets your team and everyone following you killed before you reach the target. You had 20 minutes and a complete map. What did you spend the first 10 minutes doing?" He didn't answer. "Corporal, I was working out the fastest path." "Fastest to where?" He was quiet. "Fastest paths are for track meets," she said. "Survivable paths are for combat. Do it again." She moved on to the next team without drama. No raised voice, no visible frustration, no statement that could be interpreted as humiliation. Brannick stood there for a moment before he sat back down, and something in his posture when he picked up the map the second time. Oakes was watching from the side of the room. He caught Elena's eye briefly as she passed, and she couldn't read his expression, not skepticism anymore. Not quite, but not anything warmer either. Something suspended, waiting. The second week was harder. Elena moved the team into a series of stress inoculation exercises that pushed at the edges of what was technically allowed under the training protocols. Not past them, she knew exactly where those lines were, but close enough that the men understood she was serious about the shape of the preparation. They did room-clearing drills in a condemned building on the Western training area, running the same 8-room layout 32 times in 2 days, until the movements became automatic. She timed every run. She identified every hesitation the microsecond. Before a man committed to a corner, the half-step of uncertainty before a threshold crossing, and she addressed each one by name, by position, by specific action. "Tanner, last entry on room 4. You're checking right before you clear left. You're doing it every time. If someone's waiting on the left, you're dead before you finish the turn." Tanner, a veteran, with 9 years in, started to say something. I know, she said, cutting him off gently. Old habit. Regroove it. She wasn't harsh. That was the thing that confused some of them. They had expected a young officer trying to prove toughness through volume and pressure, the way insecure commanders often did, shouting to fill space, performing authority. Elena did neither. She was specific, factual, and relentless in a way that was harder to argue with than anger would have been. Hale watched from the doorway one afternoon as she ran a communications drill radio protocol under simulated electronic jamming, the team cycling through alternate frequencies on compressed timelines, maintaining position reporting without losing contact with command element. She ran the drill from inside the structure with the primary team, while simultaneously monitoring the Overwatch element's transmissions and tracking timeline compliance on a clipboard. When Petrov's element missed a check-in by 40 seconds, she didn't call him on the radio. She sent a runner with a handwritten note that said only 40 sec. Recalibrate. Hale watched her do it and then quietly walked away without saying anything. That evening, he stopped by the small operations planning room she had converted into her workspace. She was alone, cross-referencing satellite imagery with Hume-NT summaries on a fold-out table that was barely big enough for everything spread across it. Stood in the doorway. You ate today? He asked. She didn't look up. Lunch. It's 2,100. I'm aware. He was quiet for a moment. Then the communications drill. Why the note instead of the radio call? She looked up then. Considered whether this was a real question or a challenge. Decided it was real. Because calling it out on the net means everyone hears it. Petrov knows his job. He didn't need an audience for the correction. The note tells him I noticed, and I'm tracking it. The audience gets nothing to pick apart. And Petrov corrects it himself without feeling like he's been demonstrated on. Hale absorbed that. That's a very specific thought process. It's the only one I've got. A beat. Then, you want coffee? She blinked. What? The machine down the hall makes something that functions as coffee if you squint at it. Yes or no? She looked at him for a moment. This big, serious, silver-haired man standing in her doorway at 9 in the evening, offering her terrible institutional coffee. Yeah, she said. Okay. He brought 2 cups back. Set one down on the edge of her table. Didn't sit, just stood, leaning against the door frame, looking at the imagery spread out in front of her. Northwest quadrant, he said after a moment. The one where you're seeing the highest thermal concentration. The structure on the north wall, the one that reads as a single room from above. It's not. That's a pre-2003 industrial building. Mosul had a lot of them. They subdivided the interiors with load-bearing partitions. What looks like one room from above is probably 3 or 4, and the partitions won't show on thermal. Elena looked at the image, looked at him. How do you know that? Because I was in Mosul in 2004, he said, in 2007, and 2011. She studied the image for a long moment, then made a notation of her planning sheet. Not a performance, just a real update to her working picture, based on new information from a source that actually knew the terrain. Subdivided partitions, she said quietly. That changes the breach geometry. Yeah. He finished his coffee. Set the cup on the edge of the table. Does. He left. She reworked 3 lines of the breach plan and didn't sleep until past midnight. The 3rd week arrived with wind and the specific gray light that Georgia produces in late November, the kind of sky that offers no warmth and no comfort and is somehow appropriate for the work being done beneath it. The live fire exercise was scheduled for Thursday. It was the culminating event of the pre-deployment training, the exercise that synthesized every individual drill into a single compound operation, run at speed, in reduced light, with real ammunition and real consequences for error. Elena had requested it move up by 48 hours. Her reasoning was documented and submitted through proper channels Based on the current training trajectory and intelligence reporting on target movement patterns, an earlier exercise window would allow time to address identified deficiencies before the operational window closed. The request was approved at 1,730 on Tuesday. With the last of the day's light dying behind the pine trees, Elena assembled the full team in the primary staging area. The compound mock-up had been constructed specifically for this exercise, a series of plywood and metal frame structures arranged to approximate the industrial complex footprint with obstacles, barriers, and simulated entry points matching the latest satellite geometry. The exercise began well. The insertion phase ran clean teams moving from the staging point to their approach positions with good noise discipline and proper interval spacing. The overwatch elements established without compromise. The primary team initiated the drainage approach on schedule. Then, at the 17-minute mark, everything came apart. The OP4, a separate ranger element playing the enemy, had been briefed to introduce a complication at the 12-minute mark, which was the standard protocol. But the complication they chose went further than the standard script. They activated a secondary radio net that introduced authentic-sounding threat traffic on one of the team's primary frequencies, jamming it with false position reports. The effect was immediate. Two team leaders received conflicting information simultaneously. One element, believing they were about to be flanked, began adjusting their approach angle without notifying command. This created a gap in the Western coverage that UPA immediately identified and moved to exploit, inserting two simulated technical vehicles into the gap and cutting off the primary team's extraction route. In the command element's position, a ranger registered the collapse in approximately 30 seconds. She heard it first, the radio traffic pattern changed, the cadence wrong, the reporting intervals off. Then she pulled up her team tracking board and saw the position drift on the Western element. Then she was already moving. What happened next was not in the exercise script. Elena keyed her radio and issued a series of instructions in rapid succession, her voice carrying the specific flatness of someone who is calm because they have processed the situation faster than panic can operate. She redirected the compromised Western element to a secondary position. She designated the Eastern Overwatch as a blocking element and repositioned them via alternate route to close the gap the OP4 had found. She called for the helicopter element, which was circling in a holding pattern 3 kilometers out, to shift its orbit southward and stand by for a non-standard extraction vector she specified by grid reference from memory. Then she moved the primary team through the breach on a modified timeline, and they cleared the target structure in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. OP-FOR vehicles reached the extraction point to find it empty. When the exercise was called and the teams reassembled at the staging area, no one said anything for almost a full minute. The normal post-exercise chatter, the immediate decompression that soldiers do after adrenaline, didn't happen. The men stood in the cold air and processed what they had just been part of. Oakes looked at Petrov. Petrov looked at Tanner. Tanner looked at Colette. Elena was already on the radio with the exercise control team, collecting the official timing and error logs. Hale walked toward her slowly, stopped a few feet away, the way he always did. His face was doing something complicated. "The frequency jam," she said without looking up from the log sheet. "Did you authorize that?" "No," he said. She looked up then. "Was it OP4 initiative?" Their team leader said he thought it was within the spirit of the exercise parameters. "Was it?" Hale was quiet for a moment. "It's exactly what a real enemy would do." "Yes." She looked back at the log. Then it was the right call. He watched her for a long moment. Where did the secondary extraction vector come from? "That wasn't in the contingency plan." "No," she said. "I added it last week, after you told me about the partition walls. It wasn't in the written plan. It was in my head." He absorbed that. You memorized a non-doctrinal extraction vector off a map you were using for something else. I memorize everything I might need, she said. I don't always know in advance what that will be. There was a silence between them that was different from every previous silence. Not the guarded, evaluating quiet of a man deciding whether to grant respect. Something more direct, more honest. Captain, Hale said. She looked up. He held eye contact for 3 seconds. Then he gave her a single, clean nod. It meant nothing ceremonial. It wasn't a speech or a gesture or a statement for anyone else's benefit. It was just one soldier acknowledging another in the specific language that serious people use when words aren't enough and performance isn't the point. Elena accepted it with the same quiet. Then they went back to work. The deployment orders came at 200 Thursday morning. Elena was still in the operations room. She had gone back to reworking the breach geometry on the northwest quadrant structure, accounting for the subdivided partitions, adjusting the team assignments and the sequencing of clearing movements. 3 coffee cups were on the corner of the table, all of them cold. The satellite imagery was spread across every available surface, held at the corners by staplers and water bottles. She was on her 4th revision of the entry sequence when her laptop pinged with the message from JSOC. She read it twice. Then she stood up, rolled the satellite prints into a tube, clipped the planning sheets into a binder, and walked to the door to wake her team. In the hallway, she nearly ran into Hale. He was already awake. She wasn't sure slept, and he was holding a cup of coffee. Not for himself. He extended it to her. Orders came through, she said. I know. He'd clearly already received the alert. We're wheels up at 530. She took the coffee. It was hot. She drank it standing in the hallway, under the fluorescent light. Partition walls, she said. I know, he said again. I'm sending you and Petrov through the northwest entry. You're the only two who'll intuitively adjust to a multi-partition layout without losing your geometry. He looked at her, not with surprise, exactly more like recognition. You thought about who goes where, he said. I thought about everything, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the drainage tunnel. You said you'd go first? I did. That's not changed? Why would it be? He held her gaze for a long moment in the empty hallway. I've known a lot of officers, he said slowly, who said things in briefings that turned into different things when the wheels went up. I know, she said. I've served under some of them. The silence stretched between them, and somewhere down the hall, a door opened, and boots hit the floor as the team began to stir, and the night started moving toward whatever waited for them on the other side of the flight. Elena finished the coffee, set the cup on a window ledge. Get them ready, she said. She walked back toward the operations room to pull her kit, and then her laptop pinged again. She almost didn't go back for it. She was 3 steps past this door, already thinking about loadout and timeline and the 1,400 details between here and the aircraft. But something made her turn. She sat down, opened the message. It was from the JSOC intelligence cell. Marked Flash, the designation used for information requiring immediate action. Time-stamped 11 minutes ago, routed through 2 relay points before reaching her network. She read the first line. Then she read it again. Her hand, which had been resting flat on the edge of the table, slowly curled into a fist. The message was 7 lines long. It took her 30 seconds to read it. By the end, the shape of everything she had planned, 3 weeks of preparation, 4 revisions of the breach geometry, the modified extraction vector she had memorized in the dark had shifted on its foundation like a building with the ground moving underneath it. Because according to the intelligence cell, as of 6 hours ago, the hostages were no longer at the industrial complex. They had been moved, and the secondary location the cell had tentatively identified was not on any map Elena had seen. 7 lines. She read them a 3rd time because the first 2 hadn't changed anything and some part of her brain was still hoping the 3rd would. It didn't. The hostages had been moved to a location the intelligence cell was calling Site Kilo, a designation that meant they had given it a name but not a confirmed address, which was the intelligence community's polite way of saying, "We think it's here, but we wouldn't bet lives on it." Tentative grid reference placed it 14 kilometers northeast of the industrial complex, in a district the cell described as densely populated residential with active commercial infrastructure. Translation: narrow streets, civilians everywhere, no clear perimeter, no clean approach, no drainage tunnel to crawl through, because there was no isolated structure to approach from underneath. Everything she had built for 3 weeks, the breach geometry, the partition wall adjustments, the modified extraction vector memorized in a hallway at 2 in the morning, was built for a different address. She sat very still for about 4 seconds. Then she picked up her radio. "Hale, operations room. Now." He appeared in the doorway 60 seconds later with his kit half assembled and the specific expression of a man who has learned that the middle of the night, plus a flash message, plus a commander's voice on the radio produces exactly one category of news. "They moved them," she said. She watched his face do the thing that experienced soldiers' faces do when they receive information that destroys a plan, not collapse, not show panic, but compress. Everything pulling inward. Processing when? 6 hours ago. Intel cell flagged it 11 minutes ago. She turned the laptop so he could see the message. Site Kilo. Grid reference puts it in the Rashid district. He leaned over the table and read it. His jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was running numbers internally. Rashid district is residential. Tight streets. No isolation buffer. No isolation buffer, she agreed. The original plan is dead. The original plan was already being revised. Now it's dead. He straightened up, looked at her. What's the timeline? Wheels Up is in 2 hours and 53 minutes. That doesn't change. We can't push the window without risking the operational deadline. She pulled a fresh map sheet from the side pocket of her planning binder and spread it on the table. I need everything you know about the Rashid district. Infrastructure, access patterns, building density, anything that helps me understand the ground before we're standing on it. Hale looked at the map. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Actually sat. Both elbows on the table, leaning in, treating this like a problem they were solving together instead of an order he was receiving. I haven't been in Rashid since 2007, he said. It's changed. Tell me what you know, and I'll account for the changes. He started talking. She started writing. For the next 90 minutes, they rebuilt the plan from the ground up. It was not a clean process. There were arguments, not loud ones, but the specific kind of focused technical friction that happens when two people who both know what they're doing disagree about the weight of a variable. Hale wanted a wider external perimeter. Elena wanted speed over coverage. They went back and forth on it 3 times, each iteration sharper than the last, until she put her pen down and said, "A wider perimeter in a residential district with that street density means we're holding civilian traffic for 6 minutes instead of 3. 6 minutes is a crowd. A crowd is a compromise. We need to be in and out before anyone has time to wonder why the street is blocked." Hale was quiet for a moment. The street blocking team needs better cover. Agreed. I'll put Oaks on that element. He's the best at making a vehicle checkpoint look routine. Oaks is supposed to be on the primary breach. Oaks is too good to waste on a breach when I need him making a checkpoint invisible. She met his eyes. Petrov takes breach lead. He didn't love it. She could see that. But he also didn't argue it because he'd watched Petrov work for 2 weeks and knew she wasn't wrong. All right, he said. She went back to writing. At 415, she walked into the team bay where the Rangers were pulling their kits together in the harsh yellow light. The room smelled of gun oil and the specific chemical scent of body armor and the kind of concentrated human energy that precedes something serious. She stood at the front of the space and waited until the ambient noise dropped on its own. She didn't call them to attention, didn't perform the moment. She just waited. It took about 5 seconds. "The objective has moved," she said. "We are running a modified plan. New target is in the Rashid district. Different terrain, different approach geometry, different risks. I'm going to brief the full modification in 10 minutes in the staging bay. Pull your kit, get your radio checks done, and be in the staging bay at 425. She paused. "Any questions right now?" Silence. Then Colette, from the back, "How different is it?" "Very," she said. "That's why we're spending 10 minutes on it instead of 2. Turned and walked out. In the staging bay, under a map that Hale had pinned to the cork board while she was in the team bay, she walked them through it. She didn't apologize for the change. She didn't editorialize about the intelligence failure or spend time on frustration. She presented the new picture with the same factual directness she'd used 3 weeks ago in the first briefing. And she watched the room absorb it, the way trained people absorb new information under time pressure, not easily, not comfortably, but functionally. Brannick raised his hand, the young corporal who had sent his team through the minefield on the map exercise. Street blocking element. If we hit civilian contact before the primary team is at the door. Oakes controls that element, Elena said. He has discretion to hold, redirect, or release civilian traffic based on operational status. His radio link to me is direct. If he calls a problem, primary team pauses. Primary team calls a problem, he redirects and holds. She looked at Oakes, who was standing to her left. "You comfortable with that?" Oakes was a quiet, broad-shouldered man from Tennessee who had been a ranger for 12 years and whose default expression was something close to neutral. He thought about the question for 2 seconds. "I'll need a secondary cover vehicle on the east end of the block." "You've got it. Petrov's element stage is there until primary team makes entry." Oakes nodded, then yeah, comfortable. She moved on. When the briefing ended, the room broke into its preparation routines, final gear checks, radio synchronization, last-minute hydration, and the kind of quiet, private mental preparation that soldiers do in the minutes before an operation when no one is watching and nothing is performed. Elena walked the perimeter of the staging bay, checking in with each element leader individually, not inspecting them, not testing them, just making contact. A brief exchange, a question or two, verifying that the modified plan had landed clearly and that any confusion had a chance to surface before they were in the air. She reached Tanner on the east side of the bay. He was adjusting his night vision mount, the kind of repetitive manual task that soldiers perform, not because it needs doing, but because having something to do with their hands helps with the waiting. "The northwest entry," he said, without looking up. "Without the drainage approach, we're going through a door instead of a floor access point." "Correct. That changes my position in the stack. You'll be number 2 behind Petrov. I've already flagged it in the modified brief. Did you see it?" He paused, then looked up. "I saw it. I just wanted to make sure you saw it." She understood what he meant. Then. He was checking whether she had genuinely given the change through or whether it was a surface-level adjustment that hadn't traced all its downstream effects. It was a reasonable thing to check. "Number 2 in a door entry versus a floor access point changes your immediate threat axis," she said. "Petrov takes the right split, you go left, you clear your corner first, and then pivot to cover the center. Hale comes in third and takes the center with you. You've done this configuration 12 times. In the training compound, the geometry is different, but the movement pattern is the same." He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. She moved on. The aircraft lifted at 533, 3 minutes behind schedule because one of the Blackhawks had a fuel system indicator issue that required a ground check and a tense 6 minutes where Elena stood on the tarmac in the cold dark, watching the crew chief and a maintenance tech work through a troubleshooting sequence with flashlights while the clock moved. The indicator cleared. They loaded and lifted. In the back of the aircraft, the team was quiet, the way soldiers get quiet when the ground drops away and the thing they've been preparing for stops being abstract. Elena sat near the forward bulkhead with her planning documents on her knee and her NVG mount flipped up, reading through the latest intelligence update that had come through 40 minutes before takeoff. The cell had refined the site kilo grid reference. They were more confident now, about 80% on the location, which in intelligence terms was about as good as you got for a target that had been identified 6 hours ago in a dense urban district. 80%. She thought about the 12 people in that building. 80%. Hale was seated across from her in the dark, and he wasn't sleeping, she could tell by the angle of his head, the specific alertness in his posture, even when he was still. After a while, he said, quietly enough that only she could hear over the rotor noise, "You know what I was doing at 29? She glanced up from the documents. "Third deployment," he said. "I was a staff sergeant. I followed orders well, and I kept my people alive, and I thought that was the whole definition of the job." He paused. "I didn't start thinking about the whole board until I was 34, 35. She looked at him. "I'm not saying this to make you feel good," he said. "I'm saying it because it's accurate." "I know," she said. Turned to look out the door window at the dark below them. "That 80% on the grid reference." "Yeah." "What's your read on the other 20? She thought about it, honestly. "If it's wrong, it means they moved them again, which means our window is already gone, and we're doing a rescue operation at an empty building." She looked back at her documents. "I don't think that's what happened." The cell flagged 2 separate corroborating signals that both traced to Rashid. You don't get 2 independent signals pointing at the same district by accident. "No," he said, "you don't." The flight took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Somewhere over the Mediterranean, Tanner fell asleep against the bulkhead. Colette spent 20 minutes writing something in a small notebook that he kept in his left chest pocket, the kind of notebook that soldiers carry for reasons they don't fully explain even to themselves. Brennick sat very still with his hands on his knees and his eyes open, the posture of a young soldier confronting, for the first time, the gap between training and the real thing. Elena watched all of it in her peripheral vision while she worked. She redrew the approach geometry 3 times on a fresh sheet of paper before she was satisfied with the flow. The Rashid district access required coming in from the south. The north approach had too many intersections where civilian vehicle traffic would be unpredictable, even at the early morning hour they were planning to move. South approach meant a longer run from the vehicle staging point to the target building, which increased exposure time, which was a trade-off she didn't love but could live with if Oakes managed the block correctly. At 8:17 local time, the aircraft crossed the coast. She folded her documents and put them in her vest. The transition from planning to movement had a specific texture, a kind of compression that everything that had been spread across maps and calculations and contingency diagrams contract into the body, into the hands and feet, and the next breath. She had felt it before. She had learned to recognize it as useful, a signal that the mind was doing what it needed to do rather than something to be managed. Team went through final checks. Radio comms verified. Night vision batteries confirmed. Weapons conditions set. Colette put his notebook away. Brannick's hands stopped being still. They landed at a staging point 8 kilometers from the district. There were vehicles waiting, 2 covered trucks and a support vehicle, arranged by the in-country coordination cell. Elena walked to the lead truck and looked at the driver, a compact man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Dara and who had spent 3 years working logistics coordination for operations in the area. "Rashid District, South Approach," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the evaluating expression of someone who has worked with a lot of incoming teams and has opinions about them. "You want to come in from the south in the morning." "We want to come in from the south before 6 a.m. while traffic is still light." He thought about it. "There's a produce market that sets up at 500 N45 on the secondary road. Going to slow you down. How much? Depends. Could be 5 minutes. Could be 15. She looked at the sky, gauging the light. If you go south-southwest, you add 400 meters, but you avoid the market road entirely. She made the call in about 2 seconds. South-southwest. Take the longer route. Dara nodded. Whatever evaluation he'd been running, something in it had resolved. He got in the truck. They moved out. The streets in the outer district were empty. At that hour, the buildings low and flat, with the specific quietness of neighborhoods, where people go to sleep early because the day starts before dawn. As they moved closer to the residential core, the architecture changed taller buildings, narrow gaps between them. Streets that had been designed for foot traffic and carts rather than vehicles, which made the trucks slow to a crawl in places. Elena sat in the passenger seat of the lead truck with her wind down and her eyes moving, reading the street the way she had been trained to read it, not looking for any one thing, but monitoring the total environment, the baseline against which a deviation would register. She counted doorways, noted parked vehicles, marked the intersections where sightlines extend and the ones where they compressed. Team was quiet behind her. At 200 meters from the target building, Dara pulled the truck into a gap between two shuttered storefronts and cut the engine. "This is as close as I take you," he said. "On foot from here." "Understood." She turned to the team. "This is it. Element leaders, execute your staging. Radio check in 90 seconds." The doors opened, and the team moved into the street like water, finding its level quiet, purposeful, spreading into their positions without drama or noise. Elena watched each element go and confirmed their directions before she pulled her own NVGs down over her eyes and felt the world shift into the green monochrome of the enhanced picture. 90 seconds later, 4 radio checks confirmed. All elements in position. Oaks was at the north end of the block. Petrov's element was staged at the east vehicle position. Hale was 2 steps behind Elena, with Tanner at his shoulder. She looked at the building. It was a 4-story residential structure with a commercial ground floor that might have been a storefront. At some point, the frontage had been modified. Up the display windows covered with corrugated metal, sheeting bolted from the inside. Entrance was a steel door, recessed slightly from the street. 2 windows on the second floor showed faint light behind heavy curtains. Someone was awake in there. She keyed her radio. All elements, stand by. And then, from the north end of the block, Oakes's voice came through in the measured cadence of a man reporting a problem he is actively managing rather than a man panicking. "Command, Oakes, I have a vehicle stopped at my position. Driver is asking questions. He's not moving." She processed this in real time. Stopped vehicle asking questions at the north mark point before the operation had initiated was not necessarily a compromised position. It could be a coincidence. An early morning driver who had taken a wrong turn. Someone with no connection to the target building at all. But it could also be someone connected to the people inside a relay, a spotter, a reaction vehicle. "Oakes, can you hold him?" "I can hold him, but he's on a phone." She felt the operation's timeline compress. If the driver was connected to the building and had already transmitted, the window was closing. If he wasn't connected, holding him too long created a scene that might draw attention. She needed to make a call, and she needed to make it now. "Hale," she said quietly, not on the radio. He moved up beside her. "If I'm wrong about that driver," she said, "and I push to entry now, we hit the door without knowing whether the building has been alerted. And if you're right about the driver," Hale said, "and you wait. They move the hostages, or they arm up." She looked at the building. The faint light behind the second floor curtain. "What would you do?" she asked. It wasn't a test. She wanted to know. Hale looked at the building, then at her. The answer was in his face before he said it, and she saw it there, not hesitation, not deference, but the actual opinion of a man with 29 years of this behind him. "I'd go," he said. Right now. She keyed her radio. All elements, execute, execute, execute. The team moved. And the second they crossed the threshold into the street, the light behind the second floor curtain went out. The light going out was not a coincidence. Elena knew it, the same way she knew everything operational, not from a single data point, but from the pattern of data points collapsing into the only shape that made sense. A light behind a curtain that had been burning for the duration of their approach, going dark at the exact moment. Her team stepped into the street was not a resident rolling over in bed. It was a signal or a reaction to one, and either way, the element of surprise she had been banking on had a shelf life, measured now in seconds. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. Hale was already moving, his hand coming up in the push signal that meant accelerate, and Tanner was already tight on his left shoulder, and the stack was compressing toward the recessed steel door with the specific urgency of people who have processed the same information without being told. Elena was at the front. She had not planned to be at the front of the door entry. The drainage tunnel approach from the original home plan had put her the front at front because the tunnel required one person to clear it first, and she had made that call explicitly. The modified Rashid plan put Petrov at the front of the door stack because door entries in residential structures with unknown interior geometry needed a lead who had done it more times than anyone else in the element, and Petrov had. But Petrov's element was staged at the east vehicle position, 40 meters away, and they were moving, but they were not there yet, and the door was here, and the light had just gone out. She pulled the breaching tool from Hale's kit as she passed him. He was holding it at his side, and she took it from his hand without asking and without breaking stride. And she heard him make a sound that wasn't quite a word, but communicated the full complexity of his reaction in about half a second. She hit the door. Not with the tool yet, she tried the handle first, the way you always tried the handle first, because a locked door and an unlocked door have different solutions, and spending half a second on the handle costs nothing if it's open and costs nothing if it's locked because you were already going to breach it anyway. It was locked. She stepped to the hinge side, set the breaching tool, and looked back at Hale. He was there, Tanner behind him. Two more at the back of the stack. Petrov, she said into the radio. 15 seconds. Petrov's voice came back, tight and moving. She looked at Hale. The math was simple, and they both knew it. 15 seconds was 15 seconds, in which whoever had turned that light off was doing something in the dark inside that building, and doing it with knowledge that people were outside. She didn't wait for Petrov. She popped the door. The breach was loud, it always was. That specific crack of metal giving and against metal that traveled up the street and into the still morning air and announced everything to everyone within 200 meters. But the stack was already moving through the threshold. Before the echo came back, Hale's hand on her shoulder the way it was supposed to be, the flow of bodies through the door continuous and without hesitation. The ground floor was dark, not the faint residual darkness of an interior at 5 in the morning. Complete darkness, the kind that meant covered windows, and no ambient light bleed, which meant someone had prepared this space to be dark. Her NVGs shifted the world into green, and she read it fast, a wide-open ground floor, stripped of whatever commercial furnishing it had once held, with a staircase on the far left wall and a corridor leading toward the rear of the building on the right. Two internal doors on the corridor, both closed. She held up a fist. The stack stopped. For 2 seconds, the room was absolutely silent. Then, from above the second floor, she heard movement. Not footsteps, not the casual sound of someone walking. The specific compressed movement of people being repositioned quickly and quietly, the kind of controlled urgency that people make when they are trying to move fast without making noise and are not entirely succeeding at either. Pointed at the corridor, made eye contact with Tanner. He peeled off with the soldier behind him and moved toward the two closed doors. Pointed at the staircase. Looked at Hale. He was already looking at her. Already positioned. Already ready. They went up. Staircase was narrow, one person wide, the kind of residential construction that predated any constancy egress, with wooden banisters that had been wrapped in electrical tape at some point for reasons that were not clear. Elena took the steps in a controlled rush, NVGs painting the ascending geometry in green, Hale tight behind her, the sound of their boots on the wooden treads, unavoidable but controlled. The second floor landing was a T-junction. Left corridor, right corridor, 3 doors visible, one at the end of the left arm, 2 on the right arm. The light she had seen from the street had come from the right side of the building. She went right. The first door on the right was ajar. She pushed it with her foot and cleared the arc in one movement empty room. Mattress on the floor, clothing scattered, a water bottle on its side. Someone had been living here recently, and recently was the operative word because the water bottle was still rolling slowly from where it had been knocked over. She moved to the second door, closed. She put her hand flat against the wood and felt nothing. No vibration, no heat differential, no sound from the other side. She looked at Hale. He was covering the left corridor and the landing simultaneously, his body angled to hold both sight lines, which was physically awkward but professionally necessary. His eyes came back to her for a half second. She tried the handle. This one opened. The room was dark and it was not empty. There were 6 people in it. They were on the floor, most of them against the far wall, some of them sitting, some of them lying down, all of them in the specific posture of people who have been in confined, stressful conditions for long enough that their bodies have stopped trying to find comfortable positions and started simply existing in whatever orientation was available. They were bound wrists, some of them ankles. Their clothing was wrong for the climate in the way that clothing becomes wrong when people have been wearing the same things for days. 6 of them, not 12. Elena held her position in the doorway and spoke quietly, in English, keeping her voice level and slow. American military, we're getting you out. Stay on the floor. Do not move. Do not make noise. Nod if you understand me. The closest person, a woman in her 40s, with dark hair matted against the side of her face and eyes that were wide and not yet processing what they were seeing, nodded. Then another. Then 3 more. The 6th was not nodding. He was not moving. She moved the NVG picture across him and registered the rise and fall of his chest, shallow but present, and the position of his right arm against his body, in a way that indicated something wrong with it. Keyed her radio. Command has 6 in the 2nd floor, northwest room. Confirmed alive. 1 possible injury. Where are the other 6? Static for half a second. Then Petrov's voice. We're on the ground floor. Both corridor rooms are clear. No contact, no personnel. 6 is missing. She felt it land in her chest, not panic, but the specific cold weight of arithmetic that doesn't work out the way you need it to. 12 hostages. 6 here. The building had 4 floors. Petrov, take the ground floor. Oakes, hold the exterior. Hale and I are going up. She looked at Hale. 6 more, she said. He was already turning toward the staircase. She looked back at the 6 people on the floor. The woman who had nodded first was watching her with an expression that was trying to be hope and wasn't quite there yet. Elena held eye contact for 1 second. We're coming back, she said. Do not move. Then she went up. The 3rd floor was different. She registered it the moment she cleared the landing, not visually, but in the texture of the air, the way a building communicates that it is occupied versus how it communicates that it isn't. There was a smell of cigarette smoke, recent and not dissipated, and the sound of a generator running somewhere above or adjacent, and the specific quality of silence that isn't actual silence, but a held silence, an intentional quiet. She moved slower. The landing opened into a wider space, more of an open area than a corridor, with 2 rooms on the left and what appeared to be a larger open space on the right that ran the width of the building. Open space had a heavy curtain across its entrance instead of a door. She moved to the curtain and stopped. Hale was at her shoulder. She could hear breathing on the other side of the curtain. More than one person. Irregular, stressed breathing, the kind that belongs to people who are frightened and trying to control it. But she could also hear something else underneath it. Something quieter. The specific controlled stillness of someone who is not frightened. Someone who is waiting. She moved the curtains aside in one fast motion and went in low. The room was large and the NVG picture took it in fast 6 more people against the right wall, bound the same as the ones downstairs. Same condition. Same posture of extended captivity. And at the far end of the room, standing between the hostages and the back wall, 2 figures. Not bound, not sitting, standing. One of them had a weapon up. Elena was moving before the picture, fully processed, dropping to the left and creating lateral distance from Hale's position. The weapon in her hands coming up, the geometry of the room and the positions of the hostages and the angles of fire collapsing into a calculation. She ran in less than a second. The man with the weapon was positioned poorly. He was using the hostages as a buffer between himself and the door, which meant his sight line to the entry point was partially obstructed by the people in front of him, which meant he had not seen Elena drop left, which meant his weapon was still tracking the center of the room where she had been. The second figure was moving. Moving toward a window at the rear of the room, not toward the hostages, not toward Elena, toward the window, which had to mean there was something on the other side of that window, or there was someone. She made the split in half a second. Hale, weapon. Got the runner. She heard Hale's voice go flat and operational. On him. She moved. The second figure reached the window as she crossed the room, got it open, one leg already over the sill, and she covered the distance in the dark and got her left hand on the back of his collar before the other leg followed. And she pulled, hard, using her body weight, the geometry of the window frame to redirect the momentum. And he came back into the room, and they both went to the floor in a collision of elbows and breathing, and the impact of bodies on old wood flooring. He was bigger than her. He got a hand free and drove it toward her face, and she turned enough that it caught her jaw rather than her nose, which hurt but didn't impair, and she used the moment of his extension to get a lock on his forearm and use the overextension against him, rolling and putting her weight through the joint in a way that stopped his movement and produced a sound from him that was pain. Then Hale was there, and then it was over. She sat up on the floor. Her jaw ached. She ran her tongue along the inside of her cheek and tasted blood where the impact had driven tissue against her teeth. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a second and looked at it in the NVG picture. Not serious. She stood up. The first figure, the one with the weapon, was on the floor with Hale crouched over him, and the weapon was no longer a factor. Hale looked across the room at Elena. "You're bleeding," he said. "I know." She moved to the 6 hostages against the wall. They were in worse shape than the ones downstairs, more dehydrated. One woman with a bruise across her cheekbone that was days old. A man whose wrist restraints had been tight enough, long enough, that the skin underneath was raw. She found the closest bound wrist and pulled her knife. "American military," she said again, cutting. "Count off for me." "How many of you are there?" "6, said one of them. A man in his 50s, broad through the shoulders, with a voice that was dry but controlled. "There were 7. One of us," he stopped. "Where's the 7th? Pointed at the ceiling. Elena looked up, then she looked at Hale. 4th floor. He handed off custody of the 2 detainees to Tanner, who had come up behind them while she was crossing the room, and who had apparently been coordinating the movement of the first 6 hostages from the 2nd floor as well. Because Elena could hear Petrov's voice on the radio confirming the first group was in motion toward the ground floor and the exterior. Cut the last restraint and stood up. The man with the controlled voice touched her forearm. "The person upstairs. He's been up there since yesterday morning." She held his gaze. "Alone? We don't know. They moved him separately." He paused. "His name is Calloway. Martin Calloway." She filed the name. "We'll get him. Stay with my team, do what they tell you, and keep moving." She went up. The fourth-floor stairs were different, narrower, steeper, the wood older and less maintained, creaking in a way the lower stairs had not. She took them as slowly as she could afford to, which was not very slowly, and each step produced a sound that felt enormous in the pre-dawn quiet of the building. Hale was 3 steps below her. The 4th floor was one open space. Full footprint of the building, subdivided by nothing. Empty, except for one person, bound to a support column near the center of the space, with what looked like nylon rope, head down, unresponsive to the light and movement. And one other person, standing near the back wall. Not moving toward the window this time, not moving toward the stairs. Standing still and looking at Elena with the specific quality of a person who has decided something and is not going to be redirected from it. He had a phone in his hand, not a weapon, a phone, screen lit. She understood what she was looking at in approximately 1 second. A dead man's switch of a different kind, a phone connected to something, a signal, a notification, a message that had not yet been sent, or that was being held by the pressure of a thumb on a screen. She stopped moving. The room was very quiet. "Put the phone down," she said. He said nothing. He was younger than she had expected, mid-20s, with the kind of lean, exhausted face that comes from sustained stress rather than inherited hardness. His thumb was on the screen. She could not see what was on the screen from here. "Whatever you're holding," she said slowly, "whatever that sends, if you release it, walk me through what you think happens next." He still said nothing. "Because right now," she said, "you're the only person in this building who still has options. That changes the second your thumb moves." His eyes went to Hale, who was visible at the stairwell opening behind Elena. Then back to her. "There are people outside," he said. His English was accented but clear. "Yes," she said. "There are. If you send it," she said, cutting him off gently, "something happens that you set up before tonight. And then we respond to it. And then more people who don't need to be part of this become part of this." She took one slow step forward. "You're the one holding the phone. You're the one who gets to decide whether that happens." His thumb shifted. She stopped. Stillness, the room, the building, the pre-dawn city from outside, and the man against the column, and Hale at the stairwell, and the phone, and the thumb, and the absolute absence of sound. "Is Calloway alive?" she asked. Something crossed the young man's face. Quick, involuntary. It was gone before she could name it, but it left a residue, not guilt exactly, but the shadow of something he hadn't decided to feel, but felt anyway. "Yes," he said. "Then the only thing that matters right now is that he stays that way." She took another slow step. The phone down. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw moved once, as if he had started to form a word and decided against it. Then he set the phone face down on the floor. Elena crossed the remaining distance in 3 fast steps and got her hand on the phone before he could change his mind. She turned it over. The screen had a message drafted in Arabic, unsent, addressed to a contact listed only as a single digit. She handed it to Hale without looking away from the man. "Train him," she said. "Hands in front. Don't hurt him." She was already moving to the column. Martin Calloway was alive. Barely functional, but alive, dehydrated, to the point where his lips had cracked and bled, with marks on his wrists from the ropes, and a cut above his right eye that had dried days ago and not been cleaned. But he responded when she put her hand on his face and said his name. His eyes opened. They were the kind of eyes that take a moment to understand what they're looking at. "Matt. Calloway. Martin. Look at me." He looked. "We're the United States military, and we're taking you out of this building. Can you walk?" His mouth moved. "Don't try to answer." "Just can you stand up?" He tried. His legs buckled. Caught him, got her shoulder under his arm, took his weight. He was heavier than he looked, and she adjusted her stance to compensate, and it was not elegant. And her jaw still ached, where she'd taken the impact on the floor below, and the building smelled of smoke and stress and old wood. And somewhere below, she could hear Petrov's voice on the radio, moving the first group of hostages toward the exterior. Hale finished restraining the young man and came to her. "I've got him," Hale said, moving to take Calloway's other side. "I know. I've got this side." Hale looked at her across Calloway's slumped shoulders. She could see his face in the green picture of the NVGs, the lines in it, the specific geography of face that had processed a lot of difficult things over a lot of years. "You took the runner," he said. "It wasn't a question." He was moving to the window. "You covered 12 feet in about 2 seconds." "Hale, I'm just noting it. Note it later." She adjusted Calloway's weight. Stairs. They went down. The building emptied from the top in reverse order, Calloway first, supported between Elena and Hale, the staircase creaking under the combined weight, 4th floor to the 3rd to the 2nd, and then the ground floor where the air was cooler and the steel door was open, and the street outside showed the first gray suggestion of dawn arriving at the edges of the sky. Petrov's voice on the radio, 11 accounted for outside. Moving to vehicles. 1 injured ambulatory. 3 need assistance. 7, Hale said into his radio. 7th is with command element, coming out now. Copy. Oakes reports the north checkpoint vehicle is secured. Driver detained. Elena steered Calloway through the door and into the street, and he makes a sound when the outside air hit him, not a word, just a sound. Involuntary response of a person who has been in a closed space for too long, feeling open air for the first time. She felt his weight shift, not because he was falling, but because something in him had registered the change and was responding to it physically. His body processing, something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. Kept her arm around him until they reached the second truck, and then she helped Petrov get him into the vehicle and made sure his legs were in before the door closed. She stood in the street. The gray dawn light was coming in from the east, painting the top edges of the buildings in the district in pale, flat color. The street was quiet. Oakes had managed the perimeter well. No civilian movement in their immediate area. No sounds of alarm. Somewhere 3 blocks away, a dog barked twice and stopped. 11 people loaded. Calloway made 12. She did the count again in her head because she always did it twice. 12. She looked at Hale, who was standing 3 feet away from her in the street. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her, across Calloway's shoulders, on the 4th floor, not warmly, not with the performed admiration of a man making a speech, with something honest, more unguarded. The expression of a man who has recalibrated something fundamental about his picture of the world, and is sitting with the result. She looked back at him. "Vehicles," she said. He nodded. They got in. The convoy moved south through the quiet streets. As the dawn light strengthened around them, and in the vehicles, the hostages were beginning to make sounds, some of them crying in the specific way that people cry when the danger has passed and the body finally allows it. Some of them talking in low voices, some of them just sitting in the particular stunned silence of people who have crossed from one reality into another and are not yet sure what the new one means. Elena sat in the front seat of the lead truck with her radio in her hand and her jaw aching and her mind already on the debrief, the timeline, the decision to breach before Petrov arrived, 4th floor, and the phone and what the drafted message had been connected to, the injured hostage on the 2nd floor whose arm needed assessment before the flight back. Dara was driving. He had been silent since they loaded. After about 5 minutes, without taking his eyes off the road, he said, "All 12? "All 12, she said. He was quiet for another minute. Then, the last one. The one from the top floor. He's the one they kept separate. Yes, that means they knew he was the one you'd come for, specifically. She looked at him. What do you mean? The man who owned that building, he's been renting it to different groups for 3 years. He doesn't ask questions, he takes money. But the last 2 days, someone started paying extra to keep one specific person on a floor that no one else could access. He paused. Someone knew that person was the one with the information that mattered. Process that. You knew this before we went in? I knew it when I woke up this morning, he said. I didn't know you were going in until you were in the truck. She held that. The implications were moving in directions she didn't have time to fully follow right now. The question of how someone had known which of the 12 was the priority, the question of what that said about the information available to the group holding them, the question of what Martin Calloway's specific value was beyond the apparent. I need everything you have on the building owner, she said. Name, contact, address, anything. I'll have it to your cell before you land. She turned back to the window. The city moved past them, the morning light arriving fully now, the streets beginning to show the first movement of people starting their days, a man on a bicycle, a woman with a cart, 2 children running along a wall. Normal life, 3 blocks from where 12 people had just been pulled back to their own. She pressed her hand against her jaw, gently, and felt the bruise forming along the bone. It would be colorful by the time they landed. Hale would say something about it because Hale said things now, had been saying things for the past 2 weeks, in the way that a person says things when they have decided to be present in a conversation, rather than evaluating it from outside. She thought about the 4th floor. The young man with the phone. The way his face had moved when she asked if Calloway was alive. She had been right to ask it. She had asked it not because it was tactically useful, it wasn't, particularly, but because she had seen something in his face that told her it was the right door to open. A person who had not felt anything about the situation would not have shown what he had shown for that half second. A person who still felt something could be reached, at least briefly, at least enough. She hadn't known it would work. She had made the judgment and acted on it. That was the whole job, most of the time. Making the judgment and acting on it and living with what happened next. 12 people in 3 vehicles heading south as the city woke up around them. The radio in her hand crackled once. Then Petrov's voice from the 3rd truck, Captain. Go ahead. A pause. Then I just want to say the 4th floor breach decision. If you'd waited for me at the door, that light goes out upstairs. And we've got a completely different problem. She was quiet for a moment. You were 15 seconds out, she said. I know, he said. 15 seconds. She clicked off the radio. Dara was looking at her sideways, with the expression of someone deciding whether or not to say something. Then he decided. Whoever briefed this mission on your side, he said, told me to expect a logistic coordinator. Someone to manage assets on the ground. He paused. They said captain, not commander. She kept her eyes on the road. Same rank. Not the same thing, he said. She didn't respond to that. Outside the window, the city slid past in the early light, and behind her, in the truck, Calloway had fallen asleep against the door, which was the deepest and most honest thing a person could do in the first minutes after being brought out of something like that, and she left him to it. Convoy reached the staging point as the sun broke full above the eastern roofline. All 12 people stepped out onto the ground and stood in the light. The sun was set professionally. The sun was fully up by the time the medical team reached the staging point, and the 12 people standing in that light looked worse in daylight than they had in the dark. That was always how it worked. Darkness obscured, daylight documented. 3 of the 12 couldn't stand without support. Martin Calloway was among them. He had woken briefly when the vehicle stopped, and then gone somewhere interior again. His eyes open, but not tracking, the specific association of a body that has been running on emergency reserves for so long that the sudden removal of threat doesn't read as safety, just as a different kind of unknown. The woman with the bruised cheekbone had a second bruise along her jaw that hadn't been visible in the NVG picture, older and yellowing at the edges. The man with the raw wrists had lost sensation in 2 fingers on his right hand, which the medic flagged immediately and which would require evaluation before the flight. Elena stood at the perimeter of the medical activity and watched it happen with the particular quality of attention to everything in the aftermath of an operation not detached, not clinical, but registering, storing. building the picture she would need for the debrief that was already waiting for her 14 time zones away. Petrov appeared at her left's shoulder. He had a water bottle, and he handed it to her without comment. She drank half of it and handed it back. "Tanner's got the 2 detainees secure in the support vehicle," he said. "The young one, the one from the 4th floor, he's been cooperative." Gave his name without being asked. "What's his name?" "Rami." That's all he gave. Said the rest could wait for whoever was doing the formal processing. She filed that. "He say anything about the phone? What the message was connected to?" "Only that it wasn't what we thought." "He said that twice." "Specifically, it's not what you think it is." She looked at Petrov. He was a careful, precise man who did not editorialize when reporting, which was one of the reasons she trusted him as a source of information in the field. "He say anything else?" He asked if Calloway was going to be okay. Quiet for a moment. "Then make sure that gets into the report." Verbatim. Already noted. She walked to where Calloway was sitting against the wheel of the second truck, a thermal blanket around his shoulders, a medic working on the cut above his eye. Calloway's head was up now. His eyes were tracking. Whatever corner he had turned in the vehicle was consolidating, crouched in front of him. Calloway. He looked at her. His eyes were gray and very clear, despite everything. The kind of eyes that process information accurately even when the body around them is struggling. "You're the one who found the 4th floor," he said. His voice was dry but functional. "We found all 4 floors. I heard you come up. The stairs creak at the 7th step." He paused. Counted them every time they came up. 14 steps, 7th one creaks. "I heard someone stop at the 7th step for about 2 seconds and then keep coming." She held his gaze. "We had to clear the 3rd floor first." "I know. I'm not." He stopped. Swallowed. "I'm not criticizing the timeline." Another pause longer. "How long was I up there?" "We believe approximately 30 hours separate from the others." Possibly longer. Something crossed his face. Not surprise. More like confirmation of a number he had already estimated internally and had been hoping was wrong. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I'm going to need a preliminary conversation before we're in the air. Not a full debrief that happens back in the States. But I need to understand what they wanted from you and whether they got any of it." He looked at her steadily. "What's your clearance level?" She told him. He absorbed that, looked at the medic working on his eyebrow, who had the diplomatic awareness to become suddenly very focused on her instrument tray. "Then we can talk," he said. "But not here. The aircraft. Private." He nodded once. She stood up and turned to find Hale standing 3 feet behind her. He was holding his own water bottle, and his helmet was off, clipped to his vest. And in the full daylight, he looked like what he was, a man in his 50s who had just run a 4-floor building clearance in the early morning hours, and was processing it with the particular steadiness of someone who has done this enough times. The body handles the adrenaline crash on a schedule. "Medical is going to clear the flight in about 40 minutes, he said. "Good." He looked at her jaw. The bruise had developed fully in the morning light, a clear band of purple and dark red along the left mandible that was visible from several feet away. "You should have the medic look at that," he said. "It's a bruise. It could be a fracture. It's not a fracture." "I know what a fracture feels like." He studied her for a moment, with the expression that she had come to recognize as his version of deciding whether to push. He decided against it. "The breach," he said, "before Petrov arrived." "I know. You deviated from the plan. I know." He was quiet for a beat. "I'm not saying you were wrong. I know that too. I'm saying it's going to be the first thing they ask at the debrief. Before the timeline, before the outcome, before any of the decision points on the upper floors. They're going to open with the breach deviation, and they're going to want a specific answer for why a captain commanding a Ranger element decided to initiate entry before her designated breach lead was in position." Elena looked at him. "And what's the answer?" "I don't know." "That's why I'm asking." She considered this. Not the question of what she would say at the debrief, She already knew that, but whether to say it now, to Hale, in the staging area with the sun climbing and the medical team moving around them. The light went out, she said. That was the variable. Everything in the modified plan assumed we had maintained some element of surprise until we hit the door. The moment that light went out, that assumption was gone. Waiting 15 seconds for Petrov to arrive meant giving 15 seconds to whatever was happening on the upper floors. I made the judgment that the cost of the wait exceeded the cost of the deviation. And the cost of the wait, Hale said slowly, turned out to be what? A hostage being moved to a window? A phone being prepped for transmission? Both. And possibly a third thing we don't know about yet. He looked at the building from where it would be visible if they were not in a staging area 8 kilometers from it. He wasn't looking at it literally. He was looking at it in his head. You were right, he said. I might have been right, she said. The outcome was what we needed. That doesn't always mean the decision was right. It means this time, the decision and the outcome aligned. He looked back at her. That expression again, the recalibration. It happened in smaller increments now than it had 3 weeks ago, but it still happened. Most officers I've served under, he said, would have said, I was right and stopped there. She shrugged slightly. Most of them probably were right too. The outcome usually is what gets remembered. But you think about the other version. The version where the decision was the same and the outcome was different. Think about it every time, she said. That's how you stay calibrated for the next one. He was quiet for a long moment. Then I owe you an apology. She looked at him. The first day. The briefing room. I made a judgment about you that was based on things that weren't relevant to your competence, and I expressed it in a way that was unprofessional, and I want to say that directly. She held his gaze. You said what the room was thinking. That doesn't make it the right thing to say. No, she agreed. But it made it the honest thing. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Hale's face didn't do smiles easily, but something in the direction of one. Wry, brief, genuine. You're not going to let me make a clean apology, he said. I'm not going to pretend the doubt wasn't there. It was there. It was reasonable given what you knew at the time, and you updated when you had more information. That's all anyone can do. She paused. The apology is accepted. Now stop standing here and get your people on the aircraft. The flight back covered a different kind of distance than the flight out. Out aircraft had carried the specific weight of pre-operational tension, the compressed energy of people moving toward something uncertain. Back, it carried the different weight of aftermath, which was heavier in some ways and lighter in others. Like professionally. The Rangers were quiet in the particular way of people who have been through something and are beginning to understand what they've been through. Some of them slept. Oakes had a cut on his forearm from the checkpoint vehicle situation that the medic had closed with 3 stitches, and he kept looking at it like he was surprised it was there. Colette took out his notebook. Elena sat with Calloway in the forward section of the aircraft, separated from the main cabin by a bulkhead that gave enough privacy for a conversation that could not happen in open air. He had declined a sedative. She had expected that. Tell me what you need to understand, he said. He had a water bottle that he was working through slowly, the careful hydration of someone who knows they went too far in the other direction and is correcting it incrementally. What they wanted from you, specifically, and the reason they kept you separate from the others. He looked at his hands for a moment. They were steadier than they'd been at the staging point. Thermal blanket and the water and the movement had helped. The cut above his eye was closed and clean now. I work contract analysis, he said. Logistics and infrastructure contracts in the region, mostly. Private sector firms bidding on reconstruction work. I verify the chain of documentation. I make sure the money goes where it's supposed to go, and the work that gets billed actually gets done. And you found something. 14 months ago, I started finding gaps. Not small ones. Systematic gaps the kind that don't happen by accident, that require active construction shell entities, double billing structures, payment routes that ran through intermediaries that didn't exist on paper. He paused. It traced to a primary contractor out of Fort Worth. $780 million in contracts over 4 years. My preliminary estimate put the fraud somewhere between 100 and 130 million. Elena kept her face neutral. Who did you report it to? A direct supervisor, then his supervisor, then the contracting authority liaison at the regional office. He took a drink of water. Nothing happened. For 11 months, nothing happened. So I contacted an investigative journalist I knew, former in bed, solid track record, and I gave her a summary. Not documents. A summary. And then 6 weeks later, my convoy gets ambushed. The aircraft hummed around them. The people who held you, Elena said carefully. You think they were connected to the contractor? I think it's a very specific coincidence that I was the only one of 12 people kept on a separate floor under separate conditions. He looked at her. They didn't ask me about ransom. They didn't ask me about political positions or religious affiliations or any of the things that the usual profile would predict. They asked me what I had given the journalist and whether I had original documentation. Did you? He held her gaze for 3 seconds. I had copies, stored separately from anything they could access. Present tense. Present tense. She processed this. The information was moving in a direction that exceeded the immediate scope of her mission. Extracting 12 people from a building was one thing. Walking back into Fort Raven carrying the threat of a $100 million fraud case connected to the circumstances of a hostage situation was a different category of problem entirely. The phone, she said. The young man on the 4th floor. He said the message wasn't what we thought. Calloway looked at her. What does that mean? I don't know yet. But he said it twice, which means it mattered to him that we understood it. Calloway was quiet. He was the one who brought me water, he said after a moment. The last 2 days. He didn't say anything, but he brought it. She filed that alongside what Petrov had told her, the name offered voluntarily. Voluntarily, the question about Calloway's condition. And now this. I'll need to relay everything you've told me to JSOC and the contracting authority, she said. I know. And you're going to need legal representation before any formal debrief. I have a JAG contact. He paused. I've been thinking about this conversation for 30 hours. In case someone came. In case the right someone came. He looked at her directly. You're 29? Yes. They sent someone 29 years old to get me out. She held his gaze. They sent the team that was ready. It was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard you on the 4th floor. When you were talking to him, I couldn't hear the words, just the register of your voice. He paused. You sounded like someone who was trying to reach a person, not manage a threat. She said nothing. That's a skill, he said, different from the breach work, different from the navigation and the planning. He looked at his hands again. I want you to know I noticed it. Get some sleep, she said. We've got a long flight. He leaned his head back against the bulkhead and was asleep in 4 minutes. She sat across from him and thought about the contractor in Fort Worth and the $100 million and the 11 months in which nothing happened. And she thought about the young man named Rami, who had brought water and said the message was not what she thought it was. And she thought about the 7th step on the 4th floor staircase that creaked, and a man who had counted every footstep above him for 30 hours. Then she pulled out her planning binder and started writing up the preliminary operational report. They landed at Ramstein at 1,640 local and were on a connecting flight to the States within 2 hours. By the time the aircraft touched down at Andrews, it was 230 on the East Coast, and the world outside the terminal windows was dark and cold in the specific way of mid-Atlantic winter, not the dramatic cold of somewhere that owned its winters, just the gray, damp cold of a place that was merely inconvenienced by them. There were people waiting, not the kind of waiting that happened when a mission came back clean and uncomplicated. There were 2 staff cars, a medical transport van for the former hostages, and in the small receiving area adjacent to the tarmac, 4 people in civilian clothes who had the specific carriage of people whose civilian clothes are a professional choice rather than a default. Elena saw them as she came down the aircraft steps and made a quick red. 2 of them were watching the hostages being transferred to the medical transport. One was on a phone. The 4th was watching her. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of compact, unremarkable build that people in his line of work often cultivated and maintained. And he had a manila folder under his arm, and the expression of someone who had been waiting long enough that patience had become its own kind of pressure. She reached the tarmac, and he walked toward her. Captain Ward. Yes. Deputy Director Farrow, JSOC Oversight. I need 20 minutes before you go anywhere. She looked at the medical transport. Calloway was being helped into it. He looked back at her once over his shoulder. The former hostages need to be processed medical first, she said. They are being. I need 20 minutes with you specifically. He nodded toward the receiving area. There's a room. The room was the kind of space that existed at every major military installation, a blank rectangle with a table and chairs and a coffee machine that looked like it had been installed in a different never replaced. Farrow put his folder on the table and sat down across from her and opened it. He spread 3 documents in front of her. She looked at them. First was a timeline of the mission, her timeline, based on the JSOC preliminary data feed that had been running in real time through their communications. It was accurate to within 2 or 3 minutes on most entries. The second was a report from the intelligence cell on Site Kilo. She read the relevant section. They had independently confirmed the building address within the hour of her extraction, which meant the 80% confidence had been justified. The third document was a single page. It was a communication log showing a message transmitted from a cell phone in the Rashid district at 527 local approximately 4 minutes after Elena's team had initiated entry, and 1 minute before she had reached the 4th floor. She read the destination of the message. She looked up at Farrow. That went to a contracting office, she said. Regional subcontractor. 3rd-tier entity registered in Cyprus. He watched her. You're not surprised. I'm surprised by the specific destination. I'm not surprised by the general direction. He leaned forward slightly. What did Calloway tell you on the aircraft? She looked at him. He told me that he would speak to JSOC and contracting authority with legal representation present. He told me I could relay that. I'm asking what he told you informally. What he told me on that aircraft, Deputy Director, he told me as the officer responsible for his safety during transport. I'm not going to convert that into a back-channel briefing before he's had access to JG counsel. The room was quiet. Farrow looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change dramatically. It compressed slightly, the way it does when a person expected one kind of resistance and encountered a different kind. You understand that what he's carrying, if it goes where it appears to be going, is a significant institutional problem. I understand that. And you understand that significant institutional problems benefit from careful management. I understand what that phrase means, she said. I also understand that Martin Calloway spent 30 hours alone on a 4th floor because he reported financial fraud through proper channels, and nothing happened for 11 months. So the phrase careful management is going to require some specificity before I engage with it. Farrow studied her face. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find something useful in the search, even if it wasn't what he had hoped to find. You're 29, he said. She was getting tired of that sentence. Yes. Who trained you? The United States Army. Before that. She looked at him. Before that is in my service record, which I assume you've read or you wouldn't be in this room. Your father was Colonel Dennis Ward, Farrow said. 41st Special Forces Group. Retired 2019. That's accurate. He ran 3 of the most complex personnel recovery operations in the group's history. One of them had complications that were institutional in nature. I know about my father's career, she said. Do you know about the 2016 inquiry? She held his gaze. I know he was cleared. He was cleared, Pharaoh said. After 14 months and a significant amount of effort by people who believed the inquiry was being used instrumentally. He paused. The contractor at the center of that inquiry was a company called Meridian Logistics. She felt something shift in the room. Not physically, nothing moved. But the temperature of the conversation changed in a way that was entirely internal, the way a room changes when the thing that was always present is finally named. Meridian Logistics, she said carefully, was deregistered in 2018. It was. Its principals reorganized under a new entity. He tapped the third document, the communication log. The Cyprus-registered company that received that message is a third-tier subsidiary of that new entity. She sat very still. The contractor that Calloway identified, she said, has historical connection to the people who spent 14 months making your father's life extremely difficult. Yes. He leaned back. I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this to manage you. I'm telling you this because you're going to hear it in the debrief tomorrow, and I would rather you hear it from me first, so that when you hear it in that room, you make decisions based on the full picture, rather than on the shock of new information. She processed it. The whole shape of it, Calloway's report, the 11 months of silence, the ambush, the separation on the 4th floor, the message, and now this. The thread ran backward through time and connected to something that had shaped her father's last years in uniform, in ways she had watched from the outside and understood only partially. Why are you telling me this? She said. Specifically you, specifically now. Because tomorrow morning at 900 there will be a formal debrief with 8 people in the room, 2 of whom have institutional interests that do not align with a clean and complete account of what happened in Mosul this morning. He held her gaze. I want to know what you know and what you're prepared to say before we're all in that room together. Then you should have gotten JAG counsel in here before starting this station, she said. Because what you're describing is a debrief pre-meeting, and that has specific procedural implications that I'm not going to ignore just because it's 3 a.m. and I've been awake for 30 hours. Pharaoh was quiet. Then he closed the folder. Captain Ward, he said, and his voice had changed, not warmer, but more direct, stripped of the careful layering of the previous several minutes. I've been in this work for 22 years. I have watched a lot of people come back operations and walk into the institutional aftermath of those operations and get taken apart by it. Not because they did anything wrong in the field, because they didn't understand the terrain they were walking into. I understand the terrain. You understand a version of it. Then I'll learn the rest tomorrow at 900 with everyone in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the folder and stood. Get some sleep, he said. I will. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Your father, he said, without turning. He would have made the same call you made tonight. The breach before Petrov arrived. She said nothing. He also would have told me what he knew, instead of making me wait for a formal room with 8 people and proper procedure. I'm not my father, she said. Pharaoh looked at her over his shoulder. Something in his expression that was harder to read than everything before it. No, he said. You're not. He left. Elena sat in the blank room for a few minutes after the door closed. The coffee machine hummed. Outside in the corridor, she could hear footsteps movement of the building at 300, the skeleton activity of people who worked through the night at the intersection of military operations and everything that happened after them. She thought about the 2016 inquiry. She had been 22 when it started in her second year, watching her father navigate 14 months of institutional pressure with the particular patience of a man who had learned that some fights required a long view. He had never talked to her about the specifics. She had known it was bad not from what he said, but from what he didn't say, and from the specific way he had looked sometimes at the end of a phone call that he'd taken in another room. He had been cleared. That was what she knew. She thought about Rami, saying the message was not what they thought. She pulled out her planning binder and wrote that down. Circled it, underlined it. Tomorrow at 900 there would be 8 people in a room, and 2 of them would have interests that didn't align with a clean account. And she was going to walk in there with 36 hours of no sleep and a bruised jaw and the full operational record of what had happened in that building. And she was going to give a complete and accurate account of every decision she had made and every reason she had made it. That was the whole plan. She closed the binder, stood up, turned off the light, and walked out into the corridor to find where they had put the team for the night. His assault. Hale was in the corridor. Of course he was. He was leaning against the wall with a cup of coffee, actual coffee this time, from somewhere that had a real machine, and he straightened when you saw her. "Pharaoh," he said. "Yes, how long?" 20 minutes, give or take." He handed her the coffee. She took it without argument this time. "He tell you about Meridian?" Hale said. She stopped mid-drink, looked at him. "You knew," she said. "I found out 4 hours ago." Someone on the coordination cell recognized the Cyprus entity and ran it back. He held her gaze. "I should have told you before Pharaoh got to you." "Yes," she said, "you should have." "I know." He wasn't defensive about it, just acknowledging the thing directly. She drank the coffee. It was good real coffee, not whatever the machine in the blank room pretended to be. "Debrief is at 900, she said. "I'll be there. The full account. Every decision, every reason. Nothing managed." He looked at her steadily. Agreed. She handed the cup back to him. "Get some sleep, Hale." She walked down the corridor toward the temporary quarters at the end of the building, and behind her she heard him take a drink of the coffee and say nothing, which was exactly right. She slept 4 hours and 20 minutes. Not because 4 hours and 20 minutes was enough. It wasn't, and she knew it wasn't, but because that was what was available between the corridor conversation with Hale and the alarm she set for 730, which gave her 90 minutes to shower, review her notes, and be in the debrief room at Andrews with her operational record in order, and her thinking clear enough to be useful. She had dreamed about the 7th step, the one that creaked. In the dream, she was the one counting footsteps from below, and the step creaked, and she woke up before whatever was at the top of the stairs reached her. The shower was in a shared facility down the hall. The water ran cold for 2 minutes, and then hot, and she stood under it until the hot ran out, and then stood under the cold for another 30 seconds. Because the cold was useful in its own way, it simplified everything down to the immediate and physical, and gave the mind a break from the circular work it did when left unsupervised. She examined her jaw in the mirror. The bruise had deepened overnight purple and dark red with a yellow border beginning to form at the edges, which meant the inflammation was doing what inflammation did and would continue doing for about 10 days, regardless of what she wanted. It was visible, and it was going to be visible in the debrief room, and there was nothing to be done about that, so she stopped looking at it and got dressed. Her notes from the aircraft and from the blank room at Andrews were in her binder, in the order she had organized them: timeline first, decision log second, the specific entries she had flagged as requiring explanation third, the breach before Petrov, the call on the 4th floor, the phone, Rami's statement that the message was not what they thought. She read through them once while drinking coffee she had found in a common area that was better than the blank room machine and worse than what Hale had produced the night before. At 8:45, she walked down the corridor toward the conference facility. Hale was already outside the room. He was in his dress uniform, which surprised her slightly. She had worn service uniform, which was appropriate and which was what she had available. And he had a folder under his arm and a second cup of coffee in his hand that he extended to her when he saw her coming. She took it. "Dress uniform," she said. "It sends a message." What message? That I'm prepared to be on the record for everything I'm about to say. He looked at her. Also, I pressed it at 600, which is the kind of thing you do when you can't sleep. She drank the coffee. Petrov appeared from the far end of the corridor at 852, followed by Tanner and Oakes. They had all found time to clean up and present themselves correctly, which she noted without commenting on. Behind them, Colette, who had at some point during the morning acquired a fresh notebook identical to the one he carried in the field, which she found oddly touching. They stood in the corridor together, for a moment, the six of them, in the flat institutional light of a building that existed specifically for the processing of things that had happened in other, more dramatic places. The debrief, she said. Give complete and accurate accounts. If you're asked about a decision I made that you disagreed with, say so. If you're asked about one you agreed with, say that too. Don't manage the narrative. Just report what happened. We're not going to Tanner started. I'm not suggesting you would. I'm saying it clearly, so there's no ambiguity about what I'm asking for. She looked at each of them briefly. All right. She opened the door. The room was configured around a long table. 8 chairs, as Pharaoh had said. 5 of them were already occupied. Pharaoh was there, at the far end, with the same manila folder. Beside him, a woman in her 40s who Elena didn't recognize, but who had the specific quality of attention of someone from the legal or oversight side of the house. 2 men in uniform, a brigadier general named Stahl, who Elena had met once at a training event, and whose reputation was for meticulous paperwork and significant political awareness, and a colonel named Dupree from the JSOC Operation Directorate, who she had not met but had been briefed on. And at the near end of the table, a 5th person, a civilian in his early 60s, who had the particular presence of someone who had not come to this meeting from another floor of this building, but from somewhere else entirely, and who was looking at Elena with the kind of focused interest that was not hostile, but was also not comfortable. His name was not introduced when she entered. That was a choice someone had made. She sat down, say. Her team arranged themselves in the chairs along the wall. They were present as witnesses and supplementary sources, not as primary deponents, which was the correct configuration. Stall opened. Captain Ward, this debrief covers the personnel recovery operation, designated Amber Kilo, conducted in the Rashid district in the early morning hours of the date in question. We'll work chronologically. I want to note for the record that this is a preliminary debrief. Formal findings will follow a complete review of all available intelligence and operational records. You are here as the mission commander. Do you understand the scope and purpose of this proceeding? Yes, sir. State your full name, rank, and assigned unit. She did. Begin with the intelligence update, received at approximately 200 on the morning of deployment. She began. She walked them through it chronologically. The way she had organized her notes, the flash message, the modified plan, the conversation with Hale, the 40-minute rebriefing of the team, the aircraft, the staging point, Dara's route adjustment. She spoke at the pace of someone who has organized their account and is delivering it without embellishment or softening, and the room was quiet in the way. Rooms are quiet when the people in them are actually listening rather than waiting for their turn. When she reached the breach, Stahl stopped her. The breach initiation was at 541 local. Your designated breach lead was 15 seconds from position. Walk me through the decision to initiate. She walked him through it. The light going out, the timeline calculus, the judgment call, and the specific reasoning behind it. She did not frame it as obviously correct. She framed it as the decision she made, the factors she weighed, and the outcome that followed. Dupree leaned forward. If the light had gone out because a resident rolled over in bed, and Petrov's element had arrived 15 seconds later, and you'd breached with full in position, how does the operation differ? It likely doesn't differ significantly, she said. The breach itself was successful either way. The 15 seconds is the variable that affected what happened on the upper floors, not the breach integrity at the door. So the question is whether the 15 seconds was worth the deviation from plan. Yes. And your answer is yes. My answer is that the outcome supports yes. I want to be precise about that distinction. Dupree looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted not dramatically, but the specific micro-adjustment of a person encountering a level of precision they had not fully anticipated. He leaned back. Continue, she continued. The fourth floor section was where the room became a different kind of quiet. She described the young man with the phone, the position, the phone, the drafted message, the conversation, and the specific judgment she had made to try to reach him as a person rather than engage him as an armed threat. The civilians at the near end of the table, the one whose name had not been introduced, spoke for the first time. The message. You said, he told you it was not what you thought. Twice, she said. He said it twice. What did you think it was when you saw it? An alert to a reaction element, or a dead man's switch triggering something prearranged. And what did he suggest it was? He didn't say. He said it wasn't what I thought, and then he put the phone down. The unnamed civilian looked at Pharaoh. A brief exchange, not words, just a look. The kind of look that happens between people who have a shared context for the information being discussed. Elena watched it. Deputy Director, she said. At some point in this proceeding, I'd like to know the name of the gentleman to my right. Stoll's eyebrow moved. Pharaoh said, Mr. Calloway's preliminary medical debrief this morning included information that is relevant to your question about the message. She waited. The message, Pharaoh said, was addressed to a journalist contact of Calloway's. It was not a tactical alert. Rami, the individual you encountered on the fourth floor, had drafted it at some point in the preceding days. His intent, as he has now stated to the processing team, was to send Calloway's journalist contact the summary that Calloway had given her 6 weeks ago, the summary that Calloway told you about on the aircraft. He had a copy of it. The room absorbed this. He was trying to make sure it got out, Elena said. That appears to be the case. He was inside the group holding Calloway, and he was trying to make sure the information Calloway was carrying didn't disappear with Calloway. Yes, she thought about the water. 2 days of it, brought without words to a man kept alone on a fourth floor. A message drafted and not sent, held on a phone under a thumb that had chosen not to release it until someone came. What happens to him? She said. That's a processing question that's outside the scope. I understand it's outside the scope. I'm asking anyway. Pharaoh looked at her. He's in a cooperative disposition. That has implications for how his case is handled. I want that noted. His cooperation was established before he was in custody. He put the phone down before we had him. That distinction matters for how his situation is evaluated. Stoll was watching her. Captain Ward, your concern for the disposition of a detainee is noted, she said, and I want it in the record. A beat. It'll be in the record, Pharaoh said. She turned back to Stoll. The unnamed gentleman to my right. The unnamed gentleman to her right looked at Pharaoh, then at her. Then he put his hands flat on the table in the way that people do when they have decided to stop being a variable. My name is Warren Kessel, he said. I'm the senior investigator for the Inspector General's office covering defense contracting oversight in the Central Command Theater. He paused. I've been running an inquiry into the contractor that Mr. Calloway flagged for 14 months. She looked at him. 14 months, she said. Yes, the same amount of time that nothing happened after he reported through proper channels. Not quite the same. The proper channel reports went to offices that were not aligned with a clean investigation. My inquiry runs parallel and independent. We identified Calloway as a material witness 8 months ago. He met her eyes. We were trying to get him out through legal channels when his convoy was ambushed. The room was very quiet. Did you know he was at risk? She said. Kessel's jaw moved. We assessed a potential risk to his safety and initiated a protective protocol. It was not sufficient. Not sufficient. 14 months. A man on a fourth floor for 30 hours. She kept her voice even. What's the status of the inquiry? As of this morning, and based on Calloway's preliminary statement and the communication records recovered from the Rashid District operation, we have sufficient predicate to refer for criminal prosecution. He paused. Contractor, the Cyprus entity. 3 individuals identified as principals in the payment fraud structure. Another pause, and this one had weight behind it. And 2 individuals within the contracting authority office who facilitated the 11 months of institutional silence after Calloway's initial report. 2 individuals within the contracting authority. 2 people who had sat inside the apparatus and sent and made sure nothing happened until a man ended up on a 4th floor. She thought about her father. The 2016 inquiry. 14 months of a different kind of pressure. The 2016 Meridian inquiry, she said. Kessel looked at her without surprise. Yes, same principles, some overlap. Reorganized entities, same network. He held her gaze. Your father's inquiry was not a coincidence. He found a thread similar to the one Calloway found. The inquiry against him was instrumental designed to discredit him and close the investigation. He was cleared, she said. He was, and the thread he found went cold when he retired. Kessel's hands were still flat on the table. Calloway found it again. She sat with that for a moment. The full shape of it, from 2016 to now, the same networks, surviving institutional pressure. By applying institutional pressure, and the thread going cold and then being found again by a contract analyst in Fort Worth who reported it correctly and waited 11 months for something to happen. The debrief, she said. Are we still in it? Stahl looked at her. We are. Then let's finish it. They finished it. The remaining 40 minutes covered the extraction, the aircraft transport, her conversation with Calloway, and her exchange with Farrow in the blank room. She reported all of it. The part where she declined to give Farrow a back-channel briefing, she reported accurately and without apology. Farrow did not react to that. When Stahl called the session closed, people began gathering their materials, and the specific low-volume conversations of her rooms and transitioning from formal to informal started around the edges. Elena stayed in her seat and finished her notes. Kessel stood and walked toward the door, stopped beside her chair. Your father, he said quietly. He submitted a formal request to the IG's office in 2015, asking for an independent review of Meridian's contracting records. It was denied on jurisdictional grounds, a beat. The denial was processed by one of the 2 individuals we're referring for prosecution. She looked up at him. I thought you should know that, he said. Informally. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and left. The room emptied until it was just her and Hale, who had remained in his chair against the wall throughout and had now moved to the chair beside her at the table. He sat down. 14 months, he said. Yes. And the Meridian connection? Yes. He was quiet, then. Your father. When he retired, was that voluntary? She looked at the table. He said it was. He was ready, he said. 31 years he'd done what he came to do. She paused. I never knew about the IG request. He never told me. He wouldn't have, Hale said. Not judgmentally. Just accurately. No, he wouldn't. She closed her binder. He died 18 months after he retired. Cardiac event. He was 58. The room was very quiet. I didn't know that, Hale said. Most people don't. Hale was still beside her, not filling the silence with anything, which was one of the things she had come to understand about him. He knew when filling silence was the wrong instinct. The compass, she said, the one I carry, it was his. She did not typically say that to people. She said it now, and it sat in the air between them, simple and factual and carrying the weight that simple factual things carry when they are said at the right moment. Hale looked at his hands. He would have been satisfied today. He would have said there's more work to do. Yeah, Hale said. That too. She stood up, picked up her binder, moved to the door. Hale. He looked up. What you said in the corridor last night. About managing my own terrain before I walked into that room. She held his gaze. That was the right thing to say. I want you to know I heard it. He said nothing for a moment. Then you walked in there, like you already knew the terrain. I knew enough of it. You knew all of it that mattered. She opened the door. The corridor outside was ordinary institutional carpet, fluorescent light, the ambient sound of a building doing its work. Nothing dramatic, just the day continuing. Get your people home, she said. They did the job. She walked out. Formal findings from the debrief were issued 11 days later, and they were unambiguous in the ways that mattered. The breach deviation before Petrov's arrival was assessed as a sound tactical judgment given the specific circumstances, the change in observable conditions, the timeline constraints, the reasoning documented in the decision log. No finding of fault. The full operational record was entered into the permanent file without redaction. Martin Calloway gave his formal statement to Kessel's team on the 6th day, with JAG counsel present, and it ran to 47 pages. The documentation he had kept in separate storage, the copies that hadn't been touched when his convoy was ambushed, was transferred to the IG's office under seal. The Fort Worth contractors' principals were referred for prosecution on the 14th day. The 2 individuals within the contracting authority who had managed 11 months of institutional silence were placed on administrative leave pending investigation on the same date, and neither of them came back from it. Rami's cooperative disposition was formally entered into his processing record. Elena had followed up on it once through Pharaoh's office and once directly through the processing facility to make sure the documentation was accurate and complete. It was. What came after that was not her decision to make, but the record was right, and the record was what lasted. She found out about the IG denial from 2015 through Kessel, who sent her a 1-paragraph summary through official channels 3 weeks after the debrief. Her father had submitted the request using a personal leave day, so it wouldn't appear in his unit logs. He had known that if it went through official channels with his name attached to his rank and position, it would be redirected. He had tried to work around the system, and the system had found him anyway. She read the paragraph twice, folded it, put it in the same pocket where she kept the compass. Then she went back to work. Fort Raven in January was colder than it had been in November, a different cold, harder, and more serious, the kind that arrived in from the northwest and settled into the training areas and stayed. The new rotation of Rangers had arrived in the second week, 41 soldiers instead of 45, with a different age distribution and a different aggregate of experience, and the questions in their eyes when Elena walked into the briefing room. Were the same questions that had been in the previous group's eyes and would be in every subsequent group's eyes for as long as she kept walking into rooms like this. She had stopped being surprised by the questions. She had also stopped being bothered by them, which was a different thing and a more recent development. She set her folder on the table. The projector came on. The satellite's image expanded across the wall. Before we begin, she said, I want to tell you something that isn't in any training document. The room was quiet. 41 people watching her. Competence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk in looking the way you expect it to look or sounding the way you expect it to sound. If you spend your energy deciding what capable leadership looks like before you've seen it in action, you will miss it when it's standing in front of you. And that mistake has a cost. She looked across the room, making the kind of brief, direct eye contact that conveys attention without performance. I know this because people made it about me, and I've made it about others. We all have. The habit of deciding before watching is one of the most expensive habits in this work. The room stayed quiet. I'm not saying this, so you'll give me the benefit of the doubt. I'm saying it because in the next several weeks, you're going to make decisions about each other, about who you trust, who you follow, who you dismiss before they've shown you who they are. Those decisions have consequences. Get in the habit of watching before deciding. She opened her folder, Now, here's what we're going to do. She started the briefing. In the back row, a young sergeant named Ferris, 23 years old, from Spokane, with a runner's build and the specific watchful quality of someone who has already learned that rooms tell you things if you pay attention, leaned slightly forward in his chair. He was watching. Hale retired in March. The ceremony was small by choice. He had specifically requested minimal ceremony, which the regiment had interpreted as minimal relative to what they would have done otherwise, which meant it was still a full formation with remarks from the regimental commander and a presentation that took 40 minutes. He stood through it with the particular stillness of a man who is allowing something to happen to him rather than participating in it. And when it was over, he shook hands with the people who extended hands and accepted the foulard flag from the commander with both hands and held it against his chest. Elena was there. She had driven 4 hours from a training exercise at a different installation and arrived 11 minutes before the formation started, still in her field uniform, which was not regulation for a retirement ceremony, and which Hale noticed immediately when he saw her. He didn't say anything about the uniform. After the formation broke and the crowd began to disperse in the way of every military ceremony, gradually, with small clusters, forming and drifting, Hale walked toward her. He was still holding the folded flag. "You drove 4 hours," he said. "It's a 6-hour drive. I made good time." He looked at her. His face was doing the complicated thing it did sometimes, when multiple things were happening in it simultaneously, and none of them were quite ready to be said. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What?" "First day. The briefing room. When I said what I said about whether you were ready. Hale, I'm not re-apologizing. I said my piece on that and you accepted it. I'm thinking about something different." He shifted the flag slightly in his hands. "The thing is, when I said it, I thought I was protecting the team. I thought I was asking the right question on their behalf. And I wasn't wrong that the question needed asking. I was wrong about the method." He paused. "There's a version of that same situation where I ask the question differently, where I don't perform the doubt for the room, where I take it private in the doubt from direct and give you a chance to answer without an audience and a verdict already in the room's head." She looked at him. "I'm telling you this not because I need absolution," he said. "I'm telling you because you're going to have people under your command who you have real doubts about. And the way you handle those doubts is going to shape whether those people get a fair shot at showing you who they are." He met her eyes. "You handled it better than I would have the first time it happens to you. I want to make sure it stays that way." She held his gaze for a long moment. "I'll remember that," she said. "Good." She looked at the flag in his hands. 29 years compressed into a rectangle of folded fabric. "What are you going to do?" she said. "My daughter lives in Asheville. I'm going to go be near her for a while and figure out what being near someone looks like when you haven't done it for 30 years. He said it simply, without the weight people sometimes put on statements like that. Just a fact and an intention. "Good," she said. "Yeah." He glanced around at the dispersing formation, the familiar landscape of a post he had been attached to for the better part of a decade. Then back at her. "You're going to have 4 more rotations this year, based on the current schedule. Probably. You're going to walk into 4 more rooms full of people who have already decided. Probably. And you're going to do what you do, and some of them are going to update their picture, and some of them aren't. Some of them won't. That's right. Some of them won't. And that's their limitation, and not yours, and the work happens anyway." He held out his right hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who has done it 10,000 times and still means it every time. "Go see your daughter," she said. "Take care of my Rangers," he said. She watched him walk away, across the parade ground, with the flag under his arm, his pace steady, his posture unchanged from how it had been every day. She had known him unhurried, deliberate. The walk of a man who has always known where he was going, even when the destination was unclear. Then she turned and walked back to her vehicle to drive 4 more hours back to a training exercise that was waiting for her. 6 months later, a sergeant named Ferris, the one who had leaned forward in the back row, on the first day of his rotation, stood at the front of a planning room in front of his own 4-man element and walked them through a map exercise with the specific precision of someone who had been paying attention to something beyond the curriculum. He called out the mine warning indicator on the restricted zone boundary before anyone else saw it. Elena was standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything. She walked away. There were other rooms, other soldiers, other mountains of doubt that needed to be climbed by whoever was willing to climb them, regardless of who was watching and what they thought before they started watching. Carried her father's compass in her chest pocket. She checked it the same way he had taught her, not because she was lost, but because knowing where north was kept everything else in proper relation. The work continued. It always did. And the only thing that ever truly distinguished the people who did it well from the people who didn't was never what they looked like walking into a room. It was what they did when the room got hard, and whether they had spent enough time preparing for that moment before it arrived to be actually ready when it did. That was the whole lesson. It fit in a sentence, but it took a lifetime to learn.